Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. It's bone conduction time, and today we're being visited by FlipEars' latest. This is the Aegis, their new bone conduction IEM, the second in the Arsenal series, joining the $850 Legion. This one is priced at $480 US. The Legion was honestly a fantastic blend of artistic style, bassy fun, and tactile sort of sensation. Can the Aegis pull off a similar trick but for less money? Well, let's find out. First, however, a quick disclaimer. The Aegis here is on loan from my good friend Make It Wayne for review. You can check out his channel right up here. This is part of a review tour that he has organized with FlipEars, and it does have to go back at the end of this stint. Massive shout out to Wayne for organizing this tour. Go check out his content, tell him I sent you. He's a great dude. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. One of the things that I think FlipEars knows how to do quite well is make the unboxing experience for their IEMs feel really special and luxurious. Not only does this box feature absolutely gorgeous art all over it, but inside you will find the classic FlipEars thank you envelope with the Arsenal series branding on it. Inside you get your paperwork with how to use the IEMs, fit them, and so on, as well as your warranty information. That's always a really nice touch, so we'll put that there. Other than that, inside the box you will find this massive carry case for the IEMs. Once you open it up with this rather smooth zipper, you will find the IEM sitting inside this foam tray already attached to their cable. That foam tray is, of course, removable, so you can take full advantage of the massive size of this case, put 2 or 3 players in here, as well as whatever else you would like. This isn't padding here on the inside for these shells, by the way. These are removable, and as you can see, these are actually FlipEars branded microfiber cleaning cloths, which I think is a great touch, especially when you want to keep those really nice brass shells nice and clean. Inside is very soft, and this case is very clearly crush resistant. Not exactly pocketable, but if cargo pants are a regular item of clothing for you, I could see you sliding this into one of those like thigh or down the leg pockets for cargo pants. Other than that, those are going to be strictly for luggage or backpacks, I would think. You get a nice Aegis branded card. You also get a full set of Elatex very premium Baroque ear tips in all the sizes you could ever want. This is actually a very premium inclusion. You also get a nice 3-dimensional FlipEars sticker for you to put on whatever it is you might want. Honestly, the Baroque ear tips are a really nice inclusion here. This whole packaging is very premium, very luxurious. It matches the overall look and premium build of the Aegis IEM. This is very awesome to see, especially on an IEM under $500 US. Let's go ahead and chat about the included cable here. This is a really nice sort of coppery brown 4-wire braided cable. It looks really premium. It feels really nice in the hands. It's nice and weighty and premium feeling. It exhibits no microphonics or any discernible memory. It lays flat. It wraps well. It just behaves. The amp connector here is FlipEars branded and matches the aesthetic of the whole rest of the IEM with that sort of coppery color. The Y-split here features the FlipEars logo on it, again matching everything else. The chin slider is a sort of 2-hole bead unit here. Unfortunately, it does not sit perfectly flat against the Y-split here, but it does stick to the cables rather well and will stay put wherever you end up putting it. So functionality is always good. The ear hooks here are quite comfortable, and the connectors not only sit flush against these recessed IEM sockets here, but there's also very clear R&L labeling on the inside. Colored ring would have been nice, but I think a red and blue ring on these beautiful sort of coppery metal surfaces would have spoiled the looks a little bit, so overall I can't fault them for not doing that. Cable feels fantastic. It's right at home on a $500 IEM. Modular terminations would have been a good upgrade, and it's something that I honestly do expect at this price range, but I think the cable overall feels excellent. Like on its bigger brother, the Legion, the Aegis' design is honestly a work of art. You get the same resin shells that you get on the Legion with the same sort of brass faceplates, just with a different design. The nozzles and the metal filters here look identical to the ones on the Legion, and ventilation similarly is 2-hole sort of on the back of the IEM here. Those work very, very well. I'm very happy to report no driver flex, no pressure buildup issues here, so clearly very well ventilated. These brass faceplates are, like on the Legion, jeweler cast brass with a rose gold plating for corrosion resistance. They are then hand finished with enamel paint for extra detail and style, also making sure that each one is unique. These are very, very weighty shells. They feel very solid in the hands. Legion's been around for a while, and I've seen no reports online of the faceplate falling off or it breaking or coming unglued. So if the Aegis is made to the same standards, which it feels and looks like it is, these should be nice and durable for quite a while. As I go ahead and pull up the specs for the Aegis, you can see that unlike the Legion, which was a tribrid configuration, the Aegis is a hybrid. You do get the same earquake bone conduction driver that the Legion has, but we lose the electret tweeter that the Legion had, and instead of the Legion dynamic driver, we now have the Aegis dynamic driver. What makes these drivers different from each other, I do not know, but they carry different names and distinctions on the FlipEars website, so I'm going to assume that they are indeed different. The shells, as you would expect from those big brass faceplates, are rather weighty, but the nozzles are identical in dimensions to the ones on the Legion, which makes sense. In terms of drivability, the low impedance here might make them a little bit harder to drive on some gear, but with the list of sources that I have in the video description, I really didn't have any issues with these. Also, the Aegis don't change sound with higher output impedance sources or impedance adapters, so what that means is whatever source you have already should be fine so long as you have the power to push these, which honestly isn't all that much. I wouldn't say that you need to rush out and go buy a source for these. Time now for one of the easiest cool wall segments that I've done in a bit. FlipEars have once again absolutely knocked it out of the park with the design on these. Aegis looks absolutely brilliant. The shells look like jewelry. It's like a commemorative coin that was made into an IEM by a jeweler. I love the paint. I love all the little details and the casting of the shields. I love the sort of laurels around the outside and the design of the wings on the shield there. It just really gives it that really premium feel, especially with the enamel washing here. This is 100% a Sub-Zero design as far as I'm concerned, just like the Legion. FlipEars is absolutely awesome for bringing this sort of jeweler-style faceplate high-end design down to a relatively affordable $500-ish IEM. I think they're doing awesome work here. Speaking of cool, I remember the Legion doing rather well with the Council of Ladies, so let's see how the Aegis here stacks up. We have a positive leaning verdict here, 3 pretties, a meh, and a not pretty. I'll go ahead and say that's an even split, but it does lean positive. We also have a very rare rating of pretty from lady number 4, which is always interesting to see. As far as compliments or comments go, the verdict, however, swings the other way, with only 2 ladies saying that they would comment or compliment these. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting reason. Let's see if we can find out why by looking at their thoughts. It's pretty interesting which ladies dig the whole Greco-Roman sort of sandal flick vibe of the Aegis here and which ones don't. Ladies numbers 2 and 5 were just overall unimpressed by these, just not their style whatsoever, which is understandable, but the rest of the ladies did seem to think that these are something pretty special. Honestly, I don't mind. I think these are absolutely amazing, as I said, and I think these look fantastic. One of the costs to having such luxuriant shells here on the Aegis is the weight that these brass faceplates bring to the overall IEM shell. Comfort, however, is honestly really similar to me compared to the Legion. The ear hooks do a good job of distributing the weight of the shells over the rest of my ear, and the design, as you can see, isn't really semi-custom in any way, meaning that there's no comfort wing or bulges or anything. It just slots into my ear really easily, and I was able to wear these for hours at a time with no real comfort issues or problems despite the weight. Didn't really feel it in my ears, honestly. Amazingly, while the Legion failed my wife's tiny ear test, the Aegis here passed with a score of yes. They might not have gotten like a glove, but Mrs. Audio Amigo was able to form and maintain a seal with these with no issues, and the seal stayed strong through laughter, speech, eating, and sort of exaggerated mouth movements. While the weight and size of these was definitely felt in her ear, she said she could definitely feel the weight on them. They weren't a major problem, and she was able to wear them quite comfortably. So, well done, FlipEars, you've passed the tiny ear test. As usual with bone conduction IEMs, we're going to start the audio evaluation by talking about the bone conduction effects. I'm happy to report that on the Aegis here, they're basically unchanged from the Legion. What that means is while this is the same bassy, energetic, tactile, bass-forward bone conduction that other IEMs on the market have, the drawbacks in terms of tonality are very heavily diminished. You don't get the same echoey, springy, artifacting tonality when you're speaking or clearing your throat like you do on IEMs like the KB02 or the Apevoix Grit. There is a very slight springiness when you're tapping the shells against your ear or moving them around in your hands like this. You don't really feel that all that much in ear. And if you're chewing on food or something, you get a particularly hard bit of chip or something, you will feel a bit of a buzz, but it's nothing that ruins the listening experience. And listening to spoken word or bassier tracks is much less tonally affected compared to the cheaper bone conduction IEMs. I threw a lot of bass heavy, very timbre sensitive tracks at this set, and it performed nearly identically to the Legion, with like 90% of tracks absolutely no artifacting, wooden tonality, or off sort of timbre at all. There were, I'd say 5 to 10% of the tracks that it did have some issues with, but overall, I will say that, like with the Legion, this has impressed me with its bone conduction implementation. It's fun, but without a lot of the drawbacks from the more affordable sets. Like with the Legion, I really enjoyed the bone conduction here, and I think it works great. Speaking of that bone conduction, though, like with the Legion, the Aegis has these effects focused on the bass. The bass here on the Aegis is every bit as dynamic and exciting as on the Legion, with the rumble of the sub bass and the punch of the mid bass really being punctuated by the tactile feedback of that bone conduction unit. While there are some songs that came across with that hollow or slightly springy tonality to them, I found that tracks like Deadmau5's Strobe and its punchy bass line felt really great in the ear with a ton of depth from that tactile sensation. The timbre was only slightly affected on some of the higher or very low frequency notes, and overall it was a very fun replay. The effect does get better in terms of timbre and tonality with bass guitar and big sort of kick drums. The drum and bass line in Rafaela Cara's Pedro has the bass drum really kicking in your ears. You can feel the buzz, and the bass guitar strings have really nice tactility that you feel in the ears. It's a very fun, very excitable bass presentation, and if what you want is to feel the tactile sensation of the bass in your ears, the Aegis will give that to you just like the Legion did. The price that you pay for all of that excitability in the bass comes in the mid-range. Like on the Legion, the lower mids here on the Aegis are warmed up, but some people, like myself, will find it rather pleasant. John Resnick's I'm Still Here definitely has that warm-leaning tonality to it. His deeper, grungier vocals, the big, deep notes on the bass guitar and the drums, they have extra emphasis to them, and it leads to a slightly imbalanced sensation for some of the other instruments. I personally don't mind the affectation. I think it lends the track some extra emotional weight, but if you're looking for that cleaner, leaner mid-range presentation, this set most likely isn't for you. Female vocals are surprisingly well represented here, however. Tsunamaki Watame's vocals are slightly warmed over in What an Amazing Swing. The big electro swing bass and those drums, they lend her vocals some slightly huskier and deeper tonality that I'm used to hearing, but Watame still manages to come across as forward and relatively clear over the rest of the instrumentation. It's a very aggressive track, musically speaking. Her voice overall has good tonality to it, and I don't feel that the slight huskiness compromises the overall feel of the track. The mids here, I would say, are fairly typical for a V-shaped set like this, warmed over in the lower mids and slightly tonally affected for female vocals, but I don't think this set has fallen off the wagon completely, and I still think it sounds really good. The upper mids and treble here have an important job. They have to be energetic enough to balance out that big bass and bone conduction power, but also be soft enough that they aren't overly fatiguing or sharp. And honestly, I think the Aegis pulls that off pretty darn well. Madonna's Hung Up does have some borderline sibilant moments on her S and T tones, but that's just how this track is mastered, and to my ears it didn't come across as fatiguing or sharp or piercing. It does help balance out that big boomy bass pretty well. And the rest of the treble is a similar story in that it's energetic in places but doesn't really cross the line into fatiguing or annoying. It's not the most articulate treble I've ever heard, but it does have decent sparkle while not sounding super smooth over. The bells, the claps, and the cymbals in Funky Town, for example, they have nice energy and a nice dynamism to it. The percussion harmonics here aren't the most even thing in the world. Some of the bells and percussion seems to wash a little longer and start a bit sharper than some of the others do, but it's not really distracting or ruining to the music in some way like with some other IEMs. I think the upper mids and the treble here do a pretty good job trying to balance out that big energetic bass presentation, and while the set definitely does lean towards the warm and bassier side of things, the upper range doesn't feel like an afterthought. It doesn't feel completely neutered. If you're particularly treble sensitive or you do pick up sibilants on female vocals very easily, maybe trial this set before you buy it, but personally speaking, I thought it was fine. Technical performance is an interesting case here. The Aegis' party piece is definitely that tactile, immersive nature of the bone conduction driver in the bass. This is 100% a fun first IEM. Low down, the technical performance is going to depend on the track that you're listening to, and some of those big EDM or hip hop tracks will trigger tonal aberration, and it's going to make the low end technical performance come across a bit bad. However, when the bone conduction driver is in its happy place, this is a pretty special set in terms of, just dynamism. The big bass drum at the start of the Droid Invasion is actually felt in the ear, and because it's not super down low in the frequency range, there really isn't a tonal penalty that you have to pay here for it. It's honestly really nice, and it feels really special when this set is working at its best. The mids and highs are, again, interesting. The Aegis actually did pretty fantastic on my Waltz for Debbie test. The extra warmth helped the background conversation come forward a bit, and the treble was good enough to render the most obvious barware moments. It did seem to struggle a bit with some of the other ones, and some of the more obvious ones in the mix did come across a bit more energetic than I typically expect them to. However, in terms of overall technical performance, if I had to compare it to other bone conduction IEMs that I've tested, I would say it's definitely easily ahead of the Apevoix Grit here, but at or around the level of the Penon Fan 3S. That is a bit unfair since the 3S is nowhere near as tactile, rumbly, or dynamic in the bone conduction as this, but it is sort of the technical benchmark around $300-400 for bone conduction IEMs, at least as far as I'm concerned. Being a bone conduction IEM, when that driver is in its happy place, the stereo separation and Perceive 3 soundstage is fantastic. The Rolling Stones' Paint It Black, I think, is a good track that showcases this. The deep drums and the bass guitar in the left ear just sound extra separated from the sitar and the guitar in the right ear. This is a very stereo mastering to begin with, and I feel like it's recreated very faithfully by the Aegis here. The track just sounds wide, expansive, and really great. Speaking of sounding great, Samba Triste also sounds great here. The Perceive 3D soundstage is nice. It has some depth to it. The bass buzzes nicely in the ear. The shakers feel in the space sort of behind and around you. The saxophone in your left ear, the guitar in the right. It all sounds very spatially correct, and the imaging lets you sort of pinpoint where things are coming from pretty easily. When the bone conduction driver is in its happy place, this is some excellent stereo separation and wonderful Perceive 3D soundstage. I would say it's right up there with some of the best IEMs at this price point, so long as the bone conduction is actually working for you. The Aegis, then, I think it's a perfect complement to the existing Legion. It offers the same bone conduction experience at a lower price with a slightly different tuning. This is still a fun bass-forward V-shaped tuning, and it has that FlipEars bone conduction magic going on. We are going to compare it to the Legion at the end here, but I did want to bring in some of the other bone conduction IEMs that I've tried at or around this price range to see how they stack up against the Aegis here. Before we get into that, though, I did come up with what I think was a fairly good analogy for bone conduction drivers in IEMs in general, and that is turbochargers on car engines. If you put a massive turbo on an engine, unless it's in boost, you're going to have pretty negative effects because it's restricting your exhaust flow and it's not going to be providing boost. If you put a small turbo on an engine, you're basically always going to be in boost, but the benefits are less felt compared to a bigger turbo. You can use clever tricks to keep a bigger turbo in boost for longer, but that only works so much of the time. So with that analogy introduced, let's go ahead and start with the comparisons. We'll kick things off with the Apevoix Grit, priced at $230 US. This is honestly your typical case of slapping a huge turbo on and calling it a day. Lots of budget sets tend to do this, the KBO2, the KBO3, the Plutus Beast, the Etude. It's a popular method to get bone conduction on an IEM because when it works, it feels great. Only issues are the horrible, springy, echoey, wooden, hollow, tonal affectation that permeates essentially all music barring a few specific tracks. Basically, the Grit is only ever in its happy place with like 10-20% of tracks, meaning that at least to me, it's never building boost properly. The Aegis, on the other hand, has a much wider happy place. It's much more natural sounding, more technical, and it's just more satisfying. Even when both bone conduction drivers are happy and working well, I think that the Aegis is the better implementation here. Yes, the Aegis is twice the price, but I feel like the Grit really competes further down in the range with the more affordable bone conduction IEMs, whereas the Aegis here competes with the more well-executed ones, at least in my opinion. Speaking of well-executed bone conduction IEMs, let's bring in the Penon Fan 3S, priced at $350 US. And yes, I did get rid of the trash factory seconds cable. No, they did not offer me a replacement. We'll talk about that some other day. The Fan 3S, using my turbo analogy, is basically a fuel economy focused turbo. It is small, it's always in boost, and even when it isn't, it's not detrimental in any way to the overall function of the IEM. It has a similar V-shaped tonality to the Aegis here, but with a cleaner, more detailed, better executed treble. It's also got a bit of a wider soundstage thanks to that bone conduction being more mid-centric as opposed to bass-centric like here on the Aegis. That said, this is still a small turbo, so the benefits of that bone conduction are limited to soundstage and soundstage only. The Aegis absolutely stomps on it when it comes to bass, specifically that wonderful tactile sensation in the bass itself. The Aegis is just more fun, more dynamic, and bassier. It is all of that at the cost of technical performance, but basically if you want to have fun, go Aegis. If you want extra soundstage and you don't want to feel something buzzing in your ears, you don't want that extra immersion, you want something that's tonally correct more of the time, grab the Fan 3S instead and hope that you don't get the horrible factory second cable. Let's go ahead and bring in a upstart, what I think is one of the most interesting IEMs I've listened to this year. It's SymphonyEars' new flagship IEM, the Prestige, priced at $680 US. I don't want to say too much in this video because the Prestige is literally my next review, but I think that in terms of the way the bone conduction is presented, the Prestige offers a very compelling middle ground between the sort of bass first fun bone conduction on the Aegis and the Legion, and the more soundstage only but tonally correct bone conduction on the Fan 3S. The Prestige here will buzz in your ear and make you feel the bass like the Aegis and Legion, just maybe a hair less intensely than these two. In exchange for that, however, while I was able to find tracks where the Aegis and the Legion sort of weren't happy in terms of timbre or tonality, I was unable to find a track that the Prestige didn't do well in. It seemed to always be happy with its bone conduction driver, very similarly to the Fan 3S. Compared to these three, the Fan 3, the Aegis, and the Legion, the Prestige is the more technical set, and it is the more detailed set as well. It's not as much fun in bass as the Legion or the Aegis here. The Prestige does have some other unique touches to it, but I'll save that for my full review video of this. Just know that if what you want is the last word in buzzy, vibratory, engaging bass, the Aegis has more of it than the Prestige, and it will come across as the bassier, more exciting listen. If, however, you want some of this, but you don't want any tonal or timbral sacrifices whatsoever, the Prestige, I think, could be something quite special. But we've been talking about it all review. Let's go ahead and bring in the Aegis' big brother, the $850 FlipEars Legion with those gorgeous Chronos helmets on the shells. This was a pretty interesting A-B comparison listening session. The bone conduction on these two is largely similar. It has that same tactile sensation in the ear. I did feel that the Legion was the boomier, sort of bassier, warmer of the two. That's not necessarily a good thing, but it's also not necessarily a bad thing. The Aegis came across a little bit cleaner in the mid-range compared to the Legion. Both of these have what I would describe as slightly wonky treble, but the Aegis puts the focus on the sort of upper mids and lower treble, while the Legion and its electret tweeter boost the mid and upper treble. If you perceive detail in that range, the Legion will come across as the more technical, more detailed, more nuanced sounding set. But honestly, I found myself preferring the more female vocal forward, sparkly emphasis on the Aegis compared to the sort of upper treble emphasis on the Legion. If your library is more instrumental in nature, if you've got mostly male vocals, a lot of jazz, a lot of rock, that sort of thing, the Legion and its sort of warmer lower mids and different treble emphasis might be the one that you'd go for. If, however, your library has a lot more female vocals in it and you don't care too much about the technical performance gain here, the Aegis at $490 or $480 feels like a great value next to the Legion here. So to wrap things up here, let's go from sort of the least tactile, least buzzy, least fun bone conduction to the most fun. So we're going to start with the Penon Fan 3S. It has the most subtle bone conduction effects of anything here on the table. While it can vibrate and give you a tactile sensation at very high volumes, this is more about soundstage and boosting the mid-range presence with its bone conduction than having fun with bassy tracks. It's more tonally correct than everything except for maybe the Prestige here. And at $350, I still think it's a pretty good value. However, we take a big leap in terms of buzzy, bassy fun to the Apevoix Grit. This is tuned similarly to the Fan 3S, but you have to sacrifice tonality, technical performance, and overall timbre to get that sort of budget-style implementation of a bone conduction IEM. You're going to get that tactile, vibratory, big boomy sensation here. It's going to be done a little bit clumsily, as I mentioned, more like a budget IEM. If you want this, but orders of magnitude better executed, the Prestige is a very special set that will give you a very similar tactile sensation to the Aegis and Legion, but executed in such a way that all of the tonal and timbral compromises are gone. More on that set tomorrow. Next up, we have the Aegis and the Legion in sort of that order. These two rumble very similarly. The Aegis just comes across a little bit cleaner, a little less warm, still very buzzy, still very impactful, just not as much so as the Legion. The Legion and its Electret come across as the more technical, slightly brighter sounding set in places, but the treble feels a little bit less smooth because of it. This is slightly more fun with the way the bass is presented compared to this, but it's extremely close between these two and actually this one as well. I think these three are much closer than this one, and then there's a massive yawning chasm between any of these and the Fan 3S. Between these two, again, personally, I prefer the tuning on the Aegis over the Legion. It just fits better with the female vocals in my library, and it's a bit better of an all-rounder, at least in my opinion, than the Legion is. So let's go ahead and pull up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary Rating Scale and see exactly where the Aegis is going to wind up on it. I think the Aegis actually presents a pretty awesome package. It's got very similar winning looks to the Legion, very similar build quality, same epic accessories, but it comes in at under $500 US. It provides you that same tactile, aggressive, bass-forward tuning with a smoother, more balanced, if less detailed treble presentation. Again, I straight up prefer the Aegis for female vocals and more poppy-type music compared to the Legion, where I think its airier, brighter treble on the Legion is better for jazz and other instrumental-type tracks. As I mentioned earlier, I personally feel that the Aegis is a better all-rounder than the Legion, and personally speaking of the two, it's the one that I personally would buy. Is the Aegis a true all-rounder? I think it can be if you're okay with a more bass-heavy V-shaped sound signature, and I think if that's what you want, it's a great pick, so long as the treble doesn't bother you and the sort of lower technical performance per dollar rating doesn't bother you as much. When I reviewed the Legion, I gave it a ranking of "This is brilliant" because it was bone conduction executed with the least possible compromises. And here comes the Aegis and accomplishes basically the exact same thing for less. No, it's not as technical, no, it's not as detailed, but it's, in my opinion, almost every bit as much fun. The only issues I can see with this are that it's slightly excitable lower treble, which some people will mind, but I personally don't. I'm going to go ahead and put this right next to its brother in "This is Brilliant." I think this is one of the bone conduction sets to beat at this price, especially if you can stand that sort of more excitable female vocal and lower treble presentation. I think it's a excellent all-rounder. If you're a bass-first kind of listener, it looks fantastic. Yeah, it's an excellent package from FlipEars. I think they did a great job with this set. If there's one big thing that makes the Aegis easier to recommend compared to the Legion, it's going to be the price. Under $500 is just a lot easier for some buyers to swallow compared to the almost $900 for the Legion, and for an experience that's very similar in terms of bass, slam, and thump, I think that this is a winning recipe for sure. Unless, that is, you want clean, present mids. Neither of these is going to satisfy that itch. This is a very bassy set, and the tonality isn't exactly what I would describe as clean or neutral. This also isn't for you if you want a treble headset, as this very clearly isn't. All of the focus is going to be on that very fun bass presentation. What I feel the Aegis represents is the best way to get a sort of bass head bone conduction IEM with the least timbral or tonal compromises. It's cheaper than the previously available best option, and it packs a wonderful punch with that bone conduction. I feel like this also works for people who are looking for a tactile bone conduction type set, but still want to enjoy female vocals, as I think that the slightly cleaner and more vocal forward sound compared to the Legion is going to satisfy a lot of folks. While I wouldn't necessarily say that this is straight up a cheaper Legion, I don't think that these sets are strictly competing with each other. They're tuned quite differently. I think that personally, this is a fantastic budget alternative to the Legion, and as I've said, this of the two is the one I personally would buy. And that does it for my review on the Aegis. Back when I reviewed the Legion, I remembered really liking it, but I just couldn't bring myself to buy one for the price that they were asking. The Aegis, however, I think I prefer the sound, and the price is much more in my wheelhouse. I think this might be the Flipears set for me. Next week, however, we're going to be taking a look at another new challenger in the bone conduction space. I already mentioned it in this review. It's the latest creation from Isaiah at SymphonyEars. It's their new flagship Prestige. So look forward to that review. It's been a long time in the making. Lots of interesting things about that IEM. But for now, as usual, just want to say thank you all so very, very much for watching and for all your continued support. A very special, massive shout out to all of my members who have joined. I really appreciate every single one of you. For those of you who haven't joined, $5 a month, you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make this channel more independent and less reliant on samples and companies to send me things. As usual, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.